Just about to enrolled agent, owner of Rogue Tax Professionals. So I'm going to answer a question I get a lot. Can I consider my employees independent contractors? So my knee-jerk response typically when somebody asks me that is, if there's a debate, it's probably the courts or the taxing authorities would conclude that they should be considered employees and not independent contractors. Most of the horror stories I've experienced in my accounting firm have come from some sort of employment claims, the employment department coming down on the employer for treating employees as independent contractors. Now, with that said, there is the potential for treating employees as independent contractors, but typically the risks are somewhat high for doing that, and the tests are somewhat rigid. And so I thought what I would do is go ahead and show you the rules, share my screen, show you the rules, and then you can decide whether or not your employees should be considered independent contractors or employees. Okay, so this is off the Oregon government website, but it is outlining what the Bureau of Labor and Industry considers an employee versus an independent contractor. And then Oregon typically has a little bit more rigid rules even beyond that. So the degree of control exercised by the alleged employer. So does the employer can they be hands off of that, off of the project? So they get hired to do the project. Does the beyond that, getting the project done, does the employer have say in what's going on? Yeah, if it's drywall or if it's paint, sure, they can specify the color, but they can't tell them how to do their job in order to get the job done. That's number one. The extent of the relative investment by the worker and the alleged employer. So I'm assuming it's kind of talking about like, well, what kind of investment has gone? So if you hire a painter, okay, then you're going to just pay them a lump sum, and then they have to supply the materials and and whatnot. And that typically is characteristic of the independent contractor. So the independent contractor has to have their own licensing, their own tools, their own business license, those kinds of things. The degree to which the worker's opportunity for profit and loss is determined by the alleged employer. So is there a profit motive? Of course there's a profit motive, but can they actually lose? Can the quote unquote independent contractor lose from this job? Like, what if they don't get the job done? Are they liable for not getting the job done? Do they have to give the money back if they don't get the job done? Maybe the project comes under or over budget. Did the independent contractor have to fill that gap, or could they just say, or are they going to get fired and not be responsible for that loss? Can the worker make money off of it as like if they're owning their own business? Or is it strictly compensation? Is it compensation? If it's compensation, they're an employee. But if there's a fixed price agreement, or if there is an agreement in which the independent contractor can make money from that agreement, then that is a characteristic of an independent contractor. The skill and initiative required to perform the job. So they should not be being told how to do the job, or they should come with the skill. Really, the employer or the hiring company should really be hands off as far as how that person gets that job done. Maybe there's a deadline, but they are not responsible for making sure that they clock in and clock out. The permanency of the relationship. So if they are seasonal workers, maybe if they are, if they're temporary, then they qualify more like an independent contractor than if they're a year-round and there doesn't seem to be a beginning, or there doesn't seem to be an end to the employment. Then maybe they're an employee. So if they're able to, they should be able to work for more than one business. That's another thing. They shouldn't be only allowed to work for the hiring company. Let's see, in determining whether worker is independent contractor and employee for purposes of determining whether an unlawful employment practices occurred, The courts in bully apply these factors: direct evidence of the right to or exercise of control, the method of payment, furnishing of equipment, and the right to fire. So again, like really the horror stories that I've experienced in my accounting firm have been a lot to do with employees being treated as independent contractors and not really being on board with that. They'll go to the employment department, they'll get fired or disgruntled, or they'll go to the employment department. If there's no record, then the employment department will come back down on that hiring company, and that's when a mess is made. Or perhaps there wasn't insurance, they weren't covered by workman's comp, and they get in an accident. Now you've got a lawsuit that could have been handled by workman's comp, but it's not. So oftentimes these are due to, these disputes are due, or that hiring companies don't want to put them on the payroll because of the cost, but in reality the costs are a lot less than if you have an issue and then there ends up being an employment claim or something like that. Justin Botier, enrolled agent, owner of Road Tax Professional.